Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Peter with us today. But Peter, before we take off, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for the invitation and greetings to all the listeners.
That sounds fantastic because Peter is here with us today because Peter Filak. Filak, is that a good way to pronounce it?
That's correct.
He is the head of partnerships and sales and is currently expanding the client and partner base of the Games for Business learning platform. And since 2010, he has been involved in the development of gamification-based solutions for L&D and HR purposes, multinational corporations and higher education institutions. And he has earned, of course, the Coursera Verified Certificate in Professor Werbach's gamification class. And he enjoys participating at international events where he follows the latest trends in L&D and HR tech. So, Peter, is there anything we're missing from that intro that we should know?
No, it was pretty comprehensive. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we'd like to get to know our guests as well, sort of beyond the intro and the accolades and so on. And we'd like to know a little bit more about, what does being Peter in these days look like? What does it feel like to be Peter in nowadays? What does a regular day look like maybe?
Well, besides having the luck of being a father of a wonderful little daughter of mine, who is 4 years old, actually a regular work days for me mostly consists of communicating with various stakeholders, whether it's my colleagues in the company, where we plan the strategy of the company or assess anything regarding sales and marketing. Besides that, I communicate a lot with our partners, and as you mentioned, since I'm responsible for sales and partnership, with our clients and potential or future clients. So most of my day goes by with having calls online, especially since COVID. It's mostly online work. Obviously, before COVID, I used to travel a lot more. So what I do is I represent our company at all these events and towards all the clients and partners. I keep in touch with them. I correspond with them. I prepare our projects as thoroughly as possible so that our project team can then take over and manage the actual implementation process. And if we get lucky enough to be back to a little bit like the days before 2020, then I will have the chance to travel a lot more, which I used to do back then, to conferences, exhibitions, client meetings, partner meetups and workshops, etc. So that's pretty much a typical work schedule for me.
Sounds very exciting. Plenty of things going on. So, Peter, let us dive right into one of the stories of you and perhaps of the company as well. We'll see where you want to lead us, but we would like to know of a time where things were going apparently well, but in the end you realized they were not. You were going north and things went south. One of those times that you could call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. We want to be there with you at the ground level. We want to hear the story. We want to perhaps take away any lessons as well that you got from that, and of course how you got out of that fail moment and sort of moved forward.
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually. And I think the fundamentals of our company, our organization, the brand Games for Business actually started with sort of a failure because our predecessor used to be an online digital marketing agency. And we did a lot of unique online digital projects for our clients, which were actually very successful. And we also started doing game-based or gamification-based solutions already back in 2006, which is a time when gamification was not this kind of a buzzword or trendy phenomenon that nowadays almost everybody knows in the HR and learning industry where we are present. And we did really spectacular projects which received a lot of attention in the international press and received recognitions. But to be honest, we have to confess that they didn't actually make too much money for the company. They didn't bring in too much profit. They were very spectacular, and we managed to gain some fame through them. And we started that made us actually start thinking about how we can create something that is as visually engaging and motivating for the users as our flagship unique developments and projects, But how can we do it in a more out of the box, more cost efficient, and like a more ready-made solution that can still be customized, but still to provide an opportunity for clients to do exciting and really spectacular projects without thinking of 5 and 6 digit number projects. So that was pretty much our first kind of failure that motivated us to become a product development company. Other than that, of course, I can think of some failures when it comes to actual projects where through some really enthusiastic users who farmed points in our systems and had the motivation to really find out how they can make the most of the system and actually find those little secret areas where they could even take advantage of, like really getting on top of the leaderboards and everything. So those experiences on those kind of little failures made us also more aware of how to avoid such things, how to build in different mechanics into the platform that make it not possible for anybody to take advantage of some rules that maybe allow them to get ahead.
Interesting. So plenty of lessons there to go on, engagers. Always, as I like to remind you, you can always go back and listen to anything that you missed, any notes you want to take. That's one of the beauties of a podcast, right? That you can just go back and listen to it again as many times as you want or need. So, Peter, actually, let's take a spin on that. You mentioned your failure, some of the lessons that you've learned. Maybe of a story of, one of those times you either learned those lessons or many other more, and you actually had a success. It was something that you would call one of those proud moments, because we want to be there with you. We want to sit next to you, hear that story, see how you got there, and perhaps, one or two of the success factors that you believe got you there.
Yes, our first big flagship projects when we already were a product development company, with some really major clients, which made us really excited to work with companies like Coca-Cola or Generali, which are worldwide known brands. We faced challenges where they came to us and told us that they want to engage their entire employee base, including blue and white collar workers, for example. And before that, we mostly had experience with how to engage office type white collar employees. So it was an interesting challenge. How can we convey a topic that is the corporate business strategy or sales strategy of Coca-Cola to people who are working in logistics and in warehouses and have nothing really to do with that on a daily basis directly, and they don't sit in front of the computer and in front of spreadsheets all day? How can we simplify and make these kind of processes simple, easy to understand, and still present them in a way so that the knowledge can be afterwards applied in their daily lives? That these challenges are really interesting. When we have to understand a complex client process, a complex information mass that they want to kind of somehow get across, how can we simplify it? How can we break it down for the users to make it easy for them to understand and learn from it? Same thing we did, for example, with Generali, where they wanted to revamp their entire onboarding process into the digital environment. And we needed to find a way to become their virtual mentors or the virtual coaches with our system to all these newly hired colleagues and make them successful in their job. How can we break down process that maybe was a little bit hard to grasp or hard to understand all the steps in it, all the different pillars of it in a simple way? And I think those are the things that we managed to achieve with our gamified platform and with its functions.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how much gamification was a part of this strategy. And I don't know if there's anything you would like to identify or point out of the fact that using gamification and the gamified platform made a difference, or anything you validated or at least that you hypothesized made the solution at least better than if it hadn't been for the gamification solution.
Well, of course. So we are a product development company, so we created an actual learning platform which is able to convey information. Is usually applied in situations where you need to get across lots of information to a fairly large amount of people in a fairly short amount of time, and you need to do it in an engaging format because more and more we're experiencing that traditional ways of learning are failing and people are not so motivated anymore with them, or typical corporate LMS systems are not bringing the results that our clients expect from them. And yes, I think the gamified processes and the engaging visual environment and this micro-learning methodology that we apply in our platform, plus the fact that we coach the user. So we try to break down a long, complex process into simple steps and always provide them sense of achievement, sense of success as they go through the process. So these elements are crucial in making these processes more motivating. And because they are more motivating for users, they bring results for the companies. For example, Coca-Cola managed to engage over half of their workforce, even though it was not a mandatory training, to deal with the corporate strategy. And they spent more than half of that time that they spent in the system was actually done in their free time. So completely voluntarily on their own, on weekends and evening times, they just logged into the system and engaged with the corporate strategy. The same thing with Generali. Generali managed to improve their the sales performance of their newly hired colleagues by 20%, just by revamping their onboarding process into this digital and gamified environment, which is a huge gain because, well, they are market leaders in our region, and this 20% improvement in the sales results of the newly hired colleagues is equal to some of their competitors' entire annual revenue. So imagine these results. And this was not a KPI. This was actually an added bonus because their KPI was that they wanted to lose less people in the onboarding process. So they wanted to improve their retention rate. We managed to significantly improve that, dramatically improve it actually. But the fact that they even improved their sales performance was a really nice added bonus for them.
Interesting. That sounds like a very good success story for you guys. And talking about success stories, we've been through a time when it didn't go well, a time where it actually did go well. I'm guessing that at this point, and with all the experience that you guys have, you follow some form of a process, a series of steps. I mean, let's say a company comes to your door and they want to use your solution, your gamified solution. How do you go about it? How do you create that? Like, what is the thought process behind this?
Well, the very first step, or the step zero, has to be that we need to understand the client's process. So what kind of process they want to gamify, why they want to gamify it, and what are their goals. So what are those elements in their process that they want to improve or that they're not satisfied with, and what kind of outcomes do they expect or hope to gain. Once we understand that, then we can create a fitting concept or make a proposal how we would solve it. Well, obviously, there are cases when actually our platform might not be the right solution for that, and we are not afraid or we are happy to also recommend them other solutions in that case, because obviously our platform is a product that could maybe not support all processes in the world. But of course, if it fits and if we can manage it with our platform with some customization or adjustment or just a setup, then we start also assessing because our system is a learning system fundamentally. So we need to also look at the content, the information that the client wants to get across to its target group, because that's also a very crucial part of our project. Because it's one thing to have a really spectacular and well-functioning gamified system, but if the content is not relevant and not interesting for the users, then you can still fail the game. And then this next step will be when we basically set up and customize the platform based on these defined parameters and the scope of the project. Of course, we support the clients in gamifying their contents, creating micro-learning contents based on their existing source materials, whether they are PDF documents or videos or whatever. Then we, of course, once the content is integrated into the platform, we test everything together with the client. Based on the test feedback, we fine-tune it, and then we roll it out to the users. But of course, that's not the final step because we also gather surveying and gathering feedback also from the users. And based on all this feedback, we also, at later steps, we can also still fine-tune the platform. And typically our clients, especially if they're satisfied, which luckily more often than not they are, they come to us with new ideas, new needs, new areas where they want to apply the platform, or maybe new user groups they want to involve into the project. And then we keep, of course, upgrading the platform or scaling up the project.
Sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Peter. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Peter, when you think about, the idea of gamification and using games in learning processes, which seems to be one of the main things that you do, is there some sort of best practice, something that you would say, if you do this in your project, it'll typically at least make your project a little bit better?
Well, I think, maybe I mentioned it in my previous answer too, that what we believe crucial is that the goals in a project need to be really well defined. In the case of our clients who come usually from HR and learning departments or environments from typically multinational clients, this could be learning efficiency, reducing attrition rates, engaging their user base or their employee base, standing out from their competitors towards their candidates. So these are the typical kind of problem areas or issues that they come to us with. And if we can clearly define the goals and align the solutions to our platform with these goals, that's probably the most crucial element. But it's also very important, and I think that's where we are also really strong, is to consider the whole experience from a user's perspective, because that's key for engagement. And of course, not only for engagement, but for the acceptance of this project, of this platform by the users, and for the success of the project. So we have to think about what will be the motivation of the user. Why will they want to use it? How it will benefit them, or how it will make their work life, their daily life, or whatever better. So that's important. And also, as I mentioned before, content is also crucial in this process. So I think these are the ones that I would highlight.
Fantastic. Thank you for those recommendations, for sure. And talking about recommendations, would you say that there is a person that comes to your mind when you hear these questions? You've now been around in the podcast for some minutes. Somebody ring a bell, like, I would like to hear this person answering these questions on a podcast like this one on Professor Game.
Interesting question. Well, I didn't mention it yet, but we are a company based in Central Europe, but we do support clients internationally through a network of partners. And one of our partners has been working with us for quite a long time on quite a few projects. Their colleague, so their leader, Gianni Minetti, he has a lot of experience with implementing gamified solutions especially for clients in the financial sector, that kind of clients they work with. So I think his experience and his outlook could be really interesting for your listeners. He's representing Excellence Education from Milan, and his name is Gianni Minetti. But I can also think of our clients. There's, for example, Balázs Fertig, who we have worked together with when he was working at BP's shared service centers. We did a really exciting gamified project together, which is an award-winning project a couple of years ago. But we now also work together because now he works for one of the biggest banks in our region. And now he's also working with us on gamified solutions. So I think his experience could also be interesting.
Can you repeat the name of this second guest? Because I got Gianni Minetti, but I didn't get the second one.
I can repeat it. It's Balázs Fertig. But since our language, Hungarian language, is very complicated and difficult to write down and to understand, I think I better send it to you.
Sure. We can do that async after we're done with the interview. So thanks for those recommendations as well. And finishing up with this sort of stack of recommendations, is there any book that you would recommend the engagers, this audience of people, interested in games and gamification?
Well, I'm not very up to date related, since I have a 4-year-old daughter. I don't have as much time as I used to have for reading. I'm always fond of books by Malcolm Gladwell because he has a really interesting perspective on different processes in society. So I definitely recommend him. I think what I would recommend those who are interested in gamification is to look at, because everybody plays games, and our team is obviously non exception, especially our IT team. Needless to say that they play a lot of various kinds of games. And obviously when you work in gamification or you work on such a product, you tend to look at games and gamified solutions of always from perspective of how we can apply or use certain elements and mechanics that we find really interesting in these different kinds of games in our platform. And I also recommend or urge the listeners who are interested in maybe applying gamification as a methodology for whatever process to think about what kind of games they play, what they like about those games, and what elements of those games they think could be somehow used in their business process or in their whatever issue they are facing.
Fantastic. Sounds good. Some bibliography by Malcolm Gladwell, but then, some non-reading by researching and seeing games in a different perspective, for sure. So what would you say in this case, we're still talking in this world of gamification, games-based learning. What would you say is your superpower, that thing that you do at least better than most other people?
Now that I thought about it, there's one more book that I think could be still interesting that just came to my mind because I was talking about motivation, and Daniel H. Pink has a book called Motivation 3.0. That could also be interesting to read. I read only certain chapters of it, but my colleagues were recommending it to me previously, and I think that it could also be interesting. So going back to the question of superpowers, well, I think We like to think in our team, as I mentioned, we like to play games. And I think since the largest majority of our team is actually boys, I mean men, I think most of us used to play a lot of Lego. Legos, those games that you put together from different little building blocks.
Yes.
Well, I think most of us have played some sort of game, and we like to compare our learning platform to Lego because it's modular. So it has a lot of functions. And so with with one platform, we can build up and create very different kinds of projects, different looking, different feeling, different serving different purposes and goals. So I think that's probably our biggest superpower, that we have one product which makes us very efficient in terms of we can quickly implement our projects. We can be very cost efficient because we have a standard solution, but we can customize it and create a lot of different things out of it. And we also have this outsider approach with a strong perspective on the users, because we are not HR experts. We don't come from a learning background, although our founder is actually a teacher, a biology teacher, but I think our approach on looking at HR and learning processes is very out of the box. And I think that is something that helps our clients a lot.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Sounds like some very useful stuff that you're gathering there, for sure. And finally, we get to this very, very difficult question. I would argue that probably one of the most difficult ones. And you were talking about, your team playing games and getting inspiration from games. So what would you say is your favorite game, Peter?
Yeah, I'm a more traditional type of game player, which means that I prefer more analog games. So I really love playing board games and card games with friends and family. Always at Christmas times or whenever we get together with my best friends, we love to play cards and board games. I think because the cool thing about games is that all of us have different personalities, and the different games have different strengths and different characteristics that appeal to all of us. So I'm more, when I play board games, I'm more a fan of interactive games where we have to speak and use associations and maybe even trick each other. So like those fun games where you can laugh a lot, but at the same time, and that's why I think our platform is also useful, because people are motivated by very different things, and that's why we need to have a lot of different kinds of gamification elements in one system, because everybody can find their own little perk or their own little thing that they prefer or that makes them motivated, which could be for some people collecting all the badges, for other people having the highest amount of points, for other people being on top of the leaderboard, for other people maybe it's the story, the narrative that engages them. So it's a lot of different things. For me, it's these analog, very social types of games.
So I'm going to have to hold you a little bit to the fire, Peter. From those board and card games and maybe even party games, which one is the one that you say, this is the game? I would highlight this one as my either current or historical or whatever favorite game. What would that be? If I asked you specifically that, what would you go for?
Let me think, because as you might guess, we play these games in our own language, in Hungarian. I have to think in English, in the international titles of these games. Because there's one that I specifically like, which is Chameleon. It's called Chameleon, but I actually do believe that it actually was developed by a local, so a Hungarian guy, and I don't even know if it has an international version. But that one is a very interesting one.
Chameleon is a good one, then. That's a good one to have a reference of.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend to research it or look it up, because I'm pretty sure it has to have international editions.
Sounds great. And Peter, when we have some extra time, as is the case today, we like to use some of the questions that are sent by our audience, and we select them randomly. So here's a question that we're getting today: have you had a situation where you had to decide that gamification, games-based learning, or whatever way you want to name it, was not the solution to use? And of course, there's a small follow-up, which is, how did you get to that conclusion?
There have been such situations, of course. Just to name one harsh one, is when I was at an exhibition a couple of years ago, and this guy comes to me and he starts talking about their employees, how they're very underpaid and they are doing quite a risky job in the warehouses, and how they are even punished if they break something. Then it's subtracted from their salary, which is already very low. And then he comes to me with a question of, how they can change all that and like motivate these people with virtual rewards instead of providing them higher salaries or any extra bonuses or something like that. And I was telling him, I didn't want to insult him, but at the same time, I was thinking, if your employees are so underpaid, you can provide the best motivating system for them. But when you're talking about people who have such low salaries that like even getting by on a daily basis is a difficulty for them, I think it's going to be very hard to subtract the monetary motivation or the financial motivation with anything virtual and cool looking. So I think that's not a situation where I would recommend to use it. But of course, usually the challenge is when clients come to us with a very unrealistic idea of what gamification is, because many times people mix up games or gaming with gamification. Gamification is not a game. Gamified system, our platform is definitely not a game. It serves the purpose of learning, of conveying information to a target group in an engaging format. But the purpose is not to make people play the game. The purpose, everything we do in the platform, all the motivational elements are intended to motivate the user to process the content. That's the key. And sometimes there are potential clients who come to us with, they saw a really spectacular game, Fortnite, whatever, and they think we can just achieve that. Of course, for, within 2 weeks and for a $5,000 budget. So, and they compare this to something that has been developed for years or maybe even decades and has been, millions or tens of millions of dollars, if not more, have been spent on them. So sometimes people tend to have very unrealistic ideas about gamification because it's just mixed up in their heads.
Sounds amazing and sounds like very realistic, right?
Yes.
Having sort of crazy expectations from a solution with the minimum budget that you could ever even think of, right?
Yeah, and of course it should be customized too, and be available immediately and out of the box.
Absolutely.
It's like an oxymoron having something customized but out of the box. So like that in itself is interesting how some clients sometimes think about out of the box solutions. Obviously, if something is out of the box, it cannot be already adjusted and customized to your detailed expectations. So it's sometimes a challenge. But luckily, this is, I think, getting more and more rare, because I think our target groups, the industries where we are active, and these experts who are working in HR and learning, they are hearing and learning about gamification and gamified solutions more and more. And they, I think, come much more prepared and much more valid or much better questions, I think, and much more prepared for what they can expect.
Amazing. So it's good news for the industry as well.
I think so, yes. We're definitely making progress since we started.
Yeah, I love that. I've actually been mentioning it lately on my keynotes when I go to conferences. I do like to remind us, because sometimes it's all about, what's been going wrong, what we're not doing, et cetera, but also reminding us as well of how much we've progressed and advanced since, the early days, so to speak.
Definitely. If you think about it, people are meeting gamification almost daily. Almost everybody is finding gamification in the kind of applications and processes they use nowadays, whether it's their loyalty programs or applications from their favorite brand or et cetera, et cetera. It's almost everywhere it's present to a smaller or larger extent, and it's becoming more and more universal. So that's why I think people are now understand it much better.
Absolutely. So Peter, thank you very much for, sharing all your knowledge, all your understanding. Do you have any final words, any final piece of advice for the engagers that you want to leave us with? Of course, let us know where we can find more about you, about the company that you're at. Games for Learning is the exact name, right?
It's Games for Business, yes.
Games for Business. Yeah,
gamesforbusiness.com is where they can find us. They can contact us. Obviously, peter.filak@gamesforbusiness.com will also work, but through our website, they will always find us. And of course, we have our YouTube channel where we share our case study videos and other materials. We also have Facebook and LinkedIn channels, so they can find us on even Instagram. So they will find us on most social media channels, and they can connect with us really easily if they just remember Games for Business, which I think is a really catchy and easy to understand name.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Peter, again, for all that knowledge, all that understanding, all that experience that you've shared today with the engagers. However, as with any other game, eventually it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Peter. And I'd like to know if you have any future questions like the one we asked today that you would like to ask future guests, other guests. If you do, you have to go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it'll come up in a future episode and you will get your answer right there live with the guest. And before you go on to your next mission, remember to follow for free using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.